Okay. Well, as I said in an earlier video, I was going to talk a little bit about infill. And specifically, we're going to talk about how the stringers run parallel at each bulkhead, usually through the center section of a fuselage. But then they begin to sort of taper and narrow towards both the tail of the airplane and again towards the front. Maybe depending on the type of airplane, it can be less pronounced at the front. In this case, the forward bulkhead is it's large. It's almost equal in size to the bulkheads behind it, which is, I don't know if it's not normal. It's, you know, different airframes, you know, can come to more of a pronounced point than others. But early warbirds typically were blunt-nosed, so that tapering effect would tend to be more noticeable towards the tail of an airplane. However, we can see clearly here that some of these stringers are bending and narrowing here at bulkhead 1. So we want to make sure we don't have a whole lot of wasted material. And what can happen if you don't pick up on that so well? Let's say I was to mark this strip to fill these 3 cells by marking the inside of the stringer location here and the inside of the stringer location here. If that taper were pronounced, and since we're using a ruler and a straight edge to cut that line, you can see that we'd have an angled cut here. Now, this is exaggerated with the pencil, and what would end up happening is none of these pieces, once they were cut from this strip, would actually fit in these openings. The tapering would be so pronounced that we might get a decent enough fit in the first opening, but thereafter that tapering would cause us to have a sloppy fit, a loose fit in both of the next 2 openings. So the way to offset it is, for me anyway, we'll just move back to where they are parallel and mark it based on those 2 locations. And what that'll do, and here we are here, and this line now is just a little bit higher here. And then when we cut that strip loose, we'll just slide it over here and fit it to the openings. We'll end up a little wider here than we need to be, but that's fine. That last piece, we'll just shave off that little wedge and cut it to fit this last opening. Whereas the first 2 openings, based on these 2 lines here, should fit straight in with very little sanding and absolutely no trimming. So we keep our speed up as we're going through the process, and we minimize the any wasted material. We minimize. Or maximize our yield and minimize waste. Right, the other thing I wanted to show you is when I do that, typically I also will mark the front. So you always mark the front end of your piece so you can keep it oriented. I know this is the top surface where I measured because I can see the pencil marks, and I know which end is the front. And then what you can kind of do is also mark where you want it to be at the front of each bulkhead. So this X will be situated just behind this bulkhead. In other words, I won't be trying to stick this in that way or upside down now. And you'd be surprised how much you can affect the fit just by flipping a piece over and getting it backwards. When you measure these and mark them and slice them properly, you're pretty close to being able to just drop them in once you make your vertical cuts, your bulkhead cuts. So now we've got our stringer cuts, our lengthwise cuts, and now we just need to mark for the bulkheads and start fitting these pieces in. So we'll take a look at this one. Again, we're a little bit wide here because we started back here, but that's fine. Again, a little bit of sanding with the block, sanding block, and coarse sandpaper. I typically use something like 80 grit or 60 grit on this phase. That way you only have to do a couple passes with the sandpaper to get enough reduction along one edge or the other to create a good fit. In other words, with fine sandpaper you might be sanding and sanding and getting nowhere. With the coarse stuff you just do a couple passes each time and check it each time, and you get there before you know it. Alright, so you set your continuation piece aside. We know we have the other two cells here. This is cell number 1, in this case actually number 3 here. And we just check our piece and see where it needs to be cut. So it is a little wide, which is cool. So when I actually missed this line when I cut, I was outside the line. So you don't typically have to do this. This is extra fit cut that I'm doing. It's because I was a little hastier, because I was trying to do it on camera and not really holding the part or the airplane where I would normally hold it to verify the marks I was making on the strip. But now it will drop right in, and again, to make sure that it goes in, you don't want it tight, you don't want it pushing the stringer out or forcing the bulkheads out, or you want it to drop in there, not loose but not tight either. You just want to get a good fit. One of the things we're also encountering in this opening is this section of the flooring here, which sticks out just a little wide. So what I'll do is we'll just take the pencil and indent the back of the, there it is, see how that fits right in there? Hopefully you can see that's in. So what I want to do is just to make sure I can get all the way in there, we're going to make a slight mark. It's right about here. So on the flip side, what I want to do is just crease the board. Let's see, we're right here. So I'm just going to take the pencil and push in the grain there a little bit so that it fits around that section of flooring. And we get our, now we're in. See that? Okay, so the part needs to be radius just slightly. In this spot on the side of the fuselage, these are practically straight, so we really don't have to do much here. But I'm going to go ahead and just induce a slight radius on it. You see how that's curved? And we'll drop it in there one more time. And the wood does swell just a slight amount when you wet it, but it's nothing to be concerned about. And then just go around with the glue line. And again, this is a CYA glue, tends to wick into that opening. It's absorbed by the wood grain. It gets pulled into that. The small spaces around. In addition, again, with this stuff, when I layer this on and the airplane gets coated 3, 4, maybe even 5 times with this, and with sanding in between coats, but this stuff also soaks in, and it is like an adhesive. It's just like a white glue. So by the time you're done, first with this adhesive, sanding, filler, and then the sand and seal painted on, you end up with a couple mil thick shell. And again, this stuff is soaking in also. This stuff is penetrating and acting as an adhesive as well. So I just, like I said, I love that stuff. It works like a champ for what I do. Anyway, moving on. So you can see we just go right down the line. With the strip we took off is for this opening, for these 3 cells right below the keel here. The next step will be to slice off another strip, this time for this side below the keel, right here. and then we alternate back and forth, just the same way you do stringers. And for the same reason, you alternate sides and with the stringers to keep everything straight on the fuselage, keep things from warping and twisting. And you do the same with your infill. So we have our X mark here. And I'll just darken that a little bit because the cut off was right on it. And then we just need to trim a little bit off the side, again because I made kind of a hasty cut and measure on that first piece for the camera. And we just trim that off. I don't toss these, believe it or not. Every once in a while you need a small piece of filler to fill in a gap or take care of some other issue. Maybe an end gets cut a little short and you need something to stuff in there. It's better to use wood to fill large gaps than it is to use filler, because filler can push through and harden and fall off and end up like a pea, like a rattle, and you don't want that. Alright, again, we're just going to put a slight bend on this. Not concerned with it. It's relatively flat here, so there's no reason to make a deep radius. And if you get a little deep with the part, you can kind of pull it out. And again, filler is going to make up both for any parts you might inset too deeply, or any parts you might, sanding will take care of any parts you leave a little high. And you can do last minute adjustments while the glue is setting, but you might have to be real careful. It's easy to push something in and then it will harden there and then you're in trouble. So just do everything kind of carefully and slowly and with consideration and so on. Alright, I'm just going to do this one strip and then I'm going to turn the camera off and hopefully be able to get a big portion of this done. I want to get rolling on the infill. It is the most time consuming aspect of the build when you use this method. Anything else that you want to do, I'm going to be scratch building a motor and hopefully getting the landing gear to retract and doing a little bit of engineering, and that's going to be time consuming as well. So, and here's the tapered cut that we're going to be doing. And it's not a real big taper, again, because that #1 bulkhead is almost as big as these other ones behind it. So there's not a whole lot of loss here as far as the size of the material goes. The other thing I want to talk about here on this thing, I remember now, this is another kit where the bulkhead on the model isn't where the bulkhead firewall, I should say firewall. If we would call this the firewall, then this would be much too shallow of a cowling. This is only half of the cowling. So what ideally they would have done is put the firewall here and molded from here to the nose. This, in other words, this piece wouldn't be balsa, this would be cowl, this would be plastic. Or we'd be doing a two-part, like we do on some of the Demonic kits, where you create the cowling ring and then you put the nose of the plastic nose onto the ring, and then that assembly becomes your cowling. And that would have been good here, because again, this is not where the firewall would be, this is. So I thought of a couple of remedies. I thought I would infill the entire airplane and then saw this off with a razor saw, and then clean up, flatten the edge, maybe put a couple, maybe a single or double layer of this material on as a firewall attached to the face of this, just sister it on there. And call that the firewall. And then build the motor out. And build this out like we do with the demo kits. Just saw this off, take it and apply it to the back of this, sand it all flush all the way around it to make it look like a solid piece cowling, and go from there. But that's an awful lot of extra work, and I don't really want to do it. And since we're not going to be opening and closing the cowling, we're moving it and putting it back on and all that. There's a good fit. Got a little bit of a gap at the bottom, which means I took a little too much material off and I sliced it. As you can see, we're going to wet this and give it a slight bend, and the immersion in the water should swell it just a little bit. And then I have a few strips here that I can use. Between the ones that I've got here, there must be one that would fit the gap if needed, and it sure looks like I'm going to need to do it. So let's just take a look and see what happens when we get this glued up. It is a gap filling super glue, and sometimes what you can do is just lay a small bead on there of adhesive right over the gap after this hardens. We come back and put one more bead on that and then sand on it, and the sawdust would fill that gap. This is one of those kinds of gaps. This is so slight, I don't think it'll need the wood filler. But there, anyway, you can see how I do the infill. And again, I'm working over 3 cells here at the nose. Probably no point on any of this will I do more than a 3-cell strip. I don't think I'm going to make strips that go all the way to the end of the airplane. That doesn't typically work out real well, and I need maximum yield. I need to be able to use as much of this strip stock or sheet stock as I can without waste. So next will be this side in the same location. And again, we'll measure and mark it from here, and then take that strip and just use it to fill here, and that way it should just be a small adjustment on the end of the airplane. All right, so that's all I wanted to show you. Thanks for watching.